Kind CEO takes beggar girl home unaware of her $100 million inheritance. What happened next will shock you. The evening rush had swallowed the city whole. Horns blared, shoes slapped against the pavement, and the golden glass walls of Grant Enterprises reflected a skyline buzzing with ambition. Michael Grant, the 42-year-old CEO of the empire inside those walls, strode through the revolving doors with the clipped urgency of a man whose schedule had never known mercy. His Bluetooth headset hummed with the voice of a board member, the words merger, valuation, risk spiraling around him. But even men of power sometimes look up. Michael's gaze snagged on a girl sitting cross-legged against a lamppost by the curb. She was barefoot, her jeans torn at the knees, a faint smear of dirt across her cheek. Yet she wasn't begging in the way he expected. Instead of holding out a cup, she clutched a sheet of crumpled paper, a child's drawing in bright crayons, offering it to passers-by for coins. Most ignored her. Some sneered. A few dropped a coin without looking. Michael slowed. The man in his ear droned on about stockholder pressure, but his attention was elsewhere. He could see the girl's eyes, deep, alert, far too proud for the sidewalk she sat on. He excused himself abruptly from the call. "We'll finish this later," he said, removing the headset. Then, almost without thinking, he ducked into the deli beside the plaza. Minutes later he emerged with a wrapped sandwich, still warm. The girl blinked when he crouched to her level and held it out. "It's turkey and cheese," he said, his tone gentle but matter-of-fact. "No strings. Just dinner." At first she shook her head. "I'm not a charity case." Michael studied her, not with pity but with the same measured patience he used in the boardroom. "Everyone's hungry," he replied. "It's just food. Take it or throw it away, it's yours." Something in his evenness cracked her resistance. Slowly, she reached for the sandwich, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against his. For a brief moment, Michael noticed a thin chain around her neck, half hidden under her collar. A small locket glinted in the fading sunlight before she tucked it away again. A bystander lifted their phone and snapped a photo, unnoticed by both. The girl unwrapped the sandwich cautiously, as though it might vanish if she opened it too quickly. She took a bite, her eyes softening though her pride kept her face guarded. "What's your name?" Michael asked. "Grace." Just one word, clipped and defensive. "Well, Grace," he said, standing again, "get some rest tonight." He turned to go but hesitated when he glanced back. Grace sat there chewing quietly, but the locket at her throat caught the last ray of sun, flashing like a secret trying to be noticed. Michael didn't know it yet, but that small act, just a sandwich at a busy street corner, was the first domino to fall. The city's lights flickered on, and with them, the start of something far larger than either of them imagined. The traffic thinned as night stretched across the city, and the sharp bite of cold crept into the air. Michael lingered at the edge of the plaza, his briefcase still in hand, his gaze drifting back to the spot by the lamppost. Grace sat huddled in her thin hoodie, sandwich long finished, her shoulders pulled tight against the chill. He should have walked away. CEOs weren't supposed to pick up strays, as his assistant Ruth would probably phrase it. Yet something in him resisted leaving her to the darkness. He crossed the street once more. "You'll freeze out here tonight," he said, his voice steady, not soft, not pitying. Grace looked up sharply, defensive. "I've done it before." Michael studied her. Despite the grime and the threadbare clothes, there was a firmness in her voice, a controlled cadence that didn't match the sidewalk. She sounded like someone who used to belong somewhere else. He drew in a slow breath. "I have a spare room. One night. No expectations. Just warmth, a shower and a real bed. Tomorrow you can go wherever you choose." Grace narrowed her eyes. "What? People don't do that. Not without wanting something back." Michael tilted his head. "Maybe I'm tired of wanting things. Tonight I just want you not to freeze." For a moment the silence stretched, broken only by the rattle of a bus pulling away from the curb. Grace hugged her knees tighter, suspicion warring with exhaustion. Finally she muttered, "If I regret this, I'll be gone before sunrise." Michael gave a small nod. "Fair enough." He signaled his driver and a sleek black car eased to the curb. Grace hesitated before climbing in, clutching her worn backpack to her chest like a shield. The interior smelled of leather and cedar, far too clean, too foreign to her. She kept her eyes locked on the window as if afraid to look too comfortable. Ruth called just as the car pulled away. Michael answered on speaker. "Your 8 o'clock dinner meeting? The investors are already seated." "Cancel it," Michael said flatly. Ruth sputtered. "Cancel? Sir, they flew in from Chicago. Tell them something came up." Reschedule. He hung up before she could argue further. Grace's head turned slightly, curiosity flickering across her face. You just ditched important people. For this? Michael offered a faint smile. Important is relative. The car rolled through neighborhoods of glass towers and neon-lit storefronts until it stopped before a modern building of steel and stone. Grace stiffened, gripping her backpack tighter. This is where you live? She asked, her voice edged with disbelief. It's where I sleep, he corrected. Home is complicated. The elevator ride was silent, the soft hum of machinery filling the space. When the doors opened to Michael's penthouse, Grace stepped out slowly, her bare feet padding across polished wood floors. She glanced around at the sweeping windows, the art on the walls, the city skyline glittering beyond. Just one night, she whispered to herself, as if making the promise aloud could keep her safe. Michael heard but said nothing. He only gestured toward the guest room, silently hoping she'd stay long enough to rest, and wondering why he suddenly cared so much that she did. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender and fresh linen, a sharp contrast to the street air still clinging to Grace's skin. She stood just inside the doorway, frozen, her backpack clutched in both hands as though setting it down might betray her. Michael rested his palm against the frame, giving her space. Bathrooms through there. Fresh towels. Take as long as you need. Grace's eyes darted around, cream-colored walls, a plush bed neatly made, a small desk with an elegant lamp. It was a room designed for comfort, for security, for someone who belonged. She had never felt less like that someone. After a long pause, she whispered, "It's too nice. I'll mess it up." Michael's lips curved in a brief smile. That's what rooms are for. Being lived in. He left her then, retreating to the living room where the city lights shimmered through glass panes. Pouring himself a glass of water, he tried to push away the unease crawling at the back of his mind. Why had he brought her here? This wasn't him. He was deliberate, careful, not the man who let strangers into his penthouse. The sound of running water broke his thoughts. Grace emerged nearly an hour later, her hair damp and combed back, wearing one of his oversized shirts that hung almost to her knees. She looked younger, though not fragile. Her spine carried a quiet resilience. She sat gingerly on the edge of the couch, eyes fixed on the skyline beyond the window. Your view's too clean, she said at last. Michael raised a brow. Too clean? Everything looks perfect from up here. No cracks, no trash, no cold floors. But down there, she gestured vaguely toward the streets below. It's different. Michael leaned against the counter, studying her. And you've lived most of your life down there? Her shoulders stiffened. Does it matter? Only if you want it to, he replied calmly. For the first time since they met, her guard wavered. She traced the rim of her glass with a finger, thoughtful. There used to be a house, she said quietly, big willow tree in the yard. My mom hung lanterns on it in the summer. When the wind blew, it sounded like whispers. Michael caught the subtle shift in her voice, the kind of nostalgia that belonged to someone who once had comfort, not someone born into hunger. Where was this house? He asked gently. She shook her head, shutting the door on the memory. Doesn't matter. It's gone. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with questions unasked. Michael respected the wall she'd raised. He'd learned enough in business negotiations to know when to stop pressing. Instead, he turned on the stereo. Soft classical notes filled the room, Debussy's Clair de Lune. To his surprise, Grace's eyes lifted in recognition. Debussy, she murmured. Not many people my age even know that. Michael froze. Her pronunciation was flawless, her tone certain. Another detail that didn't match the life she claimed. He gave her a careful look but said nothing. Grace tucked her knees up on the couch, curling into the oversized shirt. Don't get used to me being here, she said quietly, almost to herself. By morning I'll be gone. Michael nodded once, though a part of him doubted her words. As the music swelled around them, he couldn't shake the feeling that this strange, guarded girl was hiding more than just her past. And he was beginning to care what it was. Morning sunlight bled through the penthouse blinds, spilling across the polished floor. Michael stood at the window, coffee in hand, staring down at the ant-like movement of commuters below. The city never paused. It churned forward, relentless. Behind him, the faint sound of movement came from the guest room. Grace shifting in her sleep, perhaps, or preparing to vanish as she had promised. He should have let her go. Instead, questions gnawed at him, keeping him restless through the night. By the time Ruth arrived at the office that morning, Michael was already there, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, tapping through his laptop. His assistant stopped short when she noticed what was on his screen. Open databases, archived articles, missing person reports. Looking into someone? She asked carefully, placing a file on his desk. Michael rubbed his temple. Grace. The girl from last night. Ruth blinked, skeptical. You brought a homeless girl to your home? That's not like you. He ignored the jab. I need you to run a quiet check. No one outside this office hears about it. Not even compliance. Ruth pursed her lips, but she knew better than to argue when his tone carried that edge. What am I looking for? Records. School, medical, anything. She's different. He hesitated, then added, educated. But no trace on the street. It doesn't line up. Hours passed in a blur of meetings Michael barely heard. By afternoon, Ruth returned, tablet in hand, her expression tight. You might want to sit down for this, she said. He leaned back, heart quickening. Grace Harper, Ruth began, pulling up a grainy photo of a child on the screen. The resemblance was undeniable. Same sharp eyes, same jawline softened by youth. This is from 11 years ago. Private school enrollment. Withdrawn suddenly, no explanation. After that, nothing. No social security activity, no medical insurance, no employment record. She just vanished. Michael frowned, leaning closer. Harper. Yes. And it gets stranger. Ruth swiped to another document. There was a police file, sealed, but I found a reference. A missing child report tied to a family estate upstate. Wealthy family. The Harpers. Case went cold. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. And you're telling me the girl asleep in my guest room is that Grace Harper? Ruth lifted a brow. I'm telling you the odds are good. But you know what this means, right? If she is who she looks like, there's money. A lot of it. Estates don't just disappear. Michael sat back, processing. Grace's poise, her knowledge of music, the willow tree memory, it all threaded together into something bigger than a girl on a sidewalk. He exhaled slowly. Don't tell her yet. She's fragile. If this is real, we need to be careful. Ruth hesitated. Michael, if she's tied to that estate, people will come looking. Lawyers, relatives, vultures. Keeping her hidden won't be easy. Michael's jaw tightened. Then we stay ahead of them. As Ruth left, he glanced at his phone, an unread notification blinking. Someone had posted a blurry photo from last night. CEO feeds beggar girl on street corner. Already climbing in views, already sparking comments. Michael's stomach sank. He had wanted quiet answers. But the world, it seemed, had already begun asking its own questions. The morning news cycle had already devoured the story before Michael could finish his second cup of coffee. He sat in his office, television muted, eyes narrowing at the screen. There he was, caught mid-crouch, sandwich in hand, offering it to Grace. The chirun at the bottom read, Heart of Gold? CEO Michael Grant helps homeless girl, PR stunt or genuine kindness? The photo had been snapped by a passerby the night before, uploaded with a catchy caption, and within hours, it had exploded. Michael's phone buzzed constantly. Journalists called his assistant, investors texted in confusion, even old acquaintances reached out with jokes or backhanded praise. His inbox was a battlefield. Ruth stormed into his office, tablet in hand. It's everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, news blogs. They're calling you the Billionaire Samaritan. You're trending number 3 nationwide. Michael pinched the bridge of his nose. Fantastic. That's exactly what I wanted. Ruth ignored his sarcasm. Some outlets are already speculating about the girl. They're calling her the mystery beggar. If anyone digs deep enough, she trailed off. Michael's mind flashed to Ruth's discovery yesterday, the sealed files, the Harper name. If the media got hold of that before Grace was ready, it could ruin her. Meanwhile, across the city, Grace sat in the corner of a small cafe, her hood pulled low, staring at the same photo on a stranger's phone screen. Her stomach twisted as she listened to the chatter around her. Sweetheart. Not all CEOs are heartless, one woman said. Please, her friend scoffed. It's Pierre. Bet he had a photographer follow him. Grace pulled her hood tighter, her pulse quickening. She hadn't asked for this spotlight. The streets had been cruel, yes, but at least they'd been anonymous. Now strangers debated her existence, dissected her dignity in comment sections and hashtags. She slipped out of the cafe, hugging her backpack to her chest, and melted into the side streets. She couldn't risk being recognized, not when eyes were already turning toward her. Back at the penthouse, Michael returned home that evening to find the guest room empty. The bed was untouched, the closet door ajar. On the desk sat a folded note, scrawled in rushed handwriting. I told you I wouldn't stay. Thanks for the food. Don't look for me. Michael's chest tightened as he read the words. He crumpled the note in his hand, staring out at the city below. He had wanted to shield her, to buy her time, but his world and hers were colliding faster than he could control. And somewhere, an investigative reporter refreshed her screen, zooming in on the blurry photo of Grace. She paused, her brow furrowing. The shape of the locket at the girl's throat triggered something, an old missing person case she remembered from years ago. She opened a new file and began typing. The world wasn't just curious anymore. It was hunting. The following morning, Michael's office had the uneasy hush of a storm about to break. Outside, reporters clustered on the sidewalk, their camera flashes strobing each time he passed a window. Security had doubled at the entrance, but the noise of the headlines leaked in anyway. Ruth entered, her expression tight. There's a man here to see you. Says it's about the girl. Michael set down his pen. What girl? Ruth's brow lifted. You already know the answer to that. A moment later, the man in question stepped through the glass doors. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his leather briefcase polished to a sheen. Everything about him radiated precision. Mr. Grant, he said smoothly, extending a hand. Alden. I represent the Harper estate. Michael's eyes narrowed. He shook the hand but didn't smile. And what is it you want, Mr. Alden? Alden placed the briefcase on the table and clicked it open with deliberate care. Inside lay a stack of documents, neatly organized, and on top, a sealed envelope marked with an embossed crest. This, Alden said, sliding it across the desk, is a letter written by the late Charles Harper, patriarch of the Harper family. It concerns his granddaughter, Grace Harper, who, if I'm not mistaken, is currently under your roof. Michael didn't touch the envelope. His voice hardened. You've mistaken a lot. She's not under my roof anymore. Alden's expression didn't change. Wherever she is, Mr. Grant, the fact remains. She is the sole beneficiary of an estate valued at approximately $100 million. My duty is to ensure that she is found, identified, and protected. Protected? Michael echoed. Or controlled. For the first time, Alden's smile thinned. Let's not be naive. An inheritance of this magnitude attracts interest. Relatives with claims, opportunists, predators. You included, perhaps. Michael's jaw clenched. I don't want a cent from her. I just don't want her harassed. Then you'll bring her to me, Alden said smoothly. We'll handle the rest. It's what Charles Harper wanted. He tapped the envelope once more. The will is clear. Michael didn't move. His instincts screamed caution. Alden was too polished, too prepared. A man like this didn't appear without motive. Finally, Michael leaned back in his chair. If Grace wants representation, she'll choose it herself. Until then, I suggest you leave. Alden gathered his documents without protest, but his eyes glinted with cold amusement. You can try to shield her, Mr. Grant. But you know as well as I do, money this large has gravity. Pulls people in. And when it does, your good deed may look more like a liability. With that, he clicked the briefcase shut and left. Ruth exhaled slowly. Well, that was unsettling. Michael stared at the envelope still sitting on his desk. He hadn't opened it, but he didn't need to. He already felt the weight of its contents pressing against the room, threatening to pull Grace's fragile anonymity into the light. And he knew deep down this was only the beginning. Grace had always been good at disappearing. That skill kept her alive for years, slipping into shelters unnoticed, blending into street crowds, never staying in one place long enough for anyone to ask too many questions. But anonymity was no longer hers. The headlines and Alden's sudden appearance had cracked open a past she had worked hard to bury. That night, she found herself holed up in a rundown women's shelter on the edge of the city. The mattress was thin, the air damp, but at least it was safe, for now. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, her fingers brushing the familiar outline of the locket around her neck. When she closed her eyes, the memories came. The first flash was warm, golden. A sprawling garden behind a grand house, a willow tree swaying in the summer breeze. Lanterns hung from its branches, glowing like fireflies. A younger Grace, maybe 9, twirled barefoot in the grass while her mother clapped and laughed, her voice soft and musical. Then the memory shifted. The same house but darker now. Raised voices from the study. Her grandfather's stern baritone clashing with her mother's trembling pleas. A phrase burned itself into Grace's mind, she won't be safe here. Not with the vultures circling. The image fractured again. A stormy night. Suitcases by the door. Her mother kneeling in front of her, hands shaking as she fastened the locket around Grace's neck. "If anything happens, keep this safe," she whispered, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Don't let them find you until you're ready." And then silence. A car speeding away. Headlights vanishing into the rain. Grace running barefoot down the drive, the sound of tires screeching somewhere far off. That was the night everything broke. She woke with a start, heart pounding, the shelter room dim in the half-light of dawn. She pulled the locket free and snapped it open. Inside was a faded photo of her as a child with her mother, both smiling under the willow tree. Opposite the photo, engraved in delicate script, was a single word, Harper. Grace shut it quickly as though the metal itself burned her. In the corner of the room, an old television flickered, tuned to a morning news show. Her breath caught as she heard her own blurred image replayed in the viral video of Michael handing her the sandwich. The hosts debated her identity, throwing out guesses. Could she be a runaway? A scammer? A long-lost heiress? Grace pulled her hood over her head, panic twisting inside her. They were getting closer. If reporters remembered the Harper case, if Alden truly was after her, her fragile world of invisibility would crumble. She knew only one thing for certain. Michael had seen too much already. And if she didn't control the story soon, others would. She clutched the locket to her chest, a silent vow echoing in her mind. No one will decide my fate for me, not again. But deep down, she also knew that the storm she'd been running from had finally found her. The conference room on the 32nd floor of Grant Enterprises buzzed with an uneasy energy. Michael sat at the head of the long mahogany table, Ruth by his side, while across from them sat Alden, the lawyer, once again with his polished briefcase. This time, however, he wasn't alone. 2 additional men in gray suits flanked him, their presence a silent reminder of the weight behind his visit. Alden placed the briefcase on the table, opening it with the same deliberate precision. He slid a thick document across the table, its pages bound with a crimson ribbon and embossed with an official seal. "This," Alden said, his voice smooth and rehearsed, "is the last will and testament of Charles Harper, signed and notarized 10 years ago. It names Grace Harper as the sole heir to the Harper estate, valued at $100 million at the time of drafting. Adjusted for today's markets, the figure is likely much higher." Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "And you expect me to just take your word for it?" "Not at all," Alden replied, sliding over additional papers. "These are copies from the probate court. Everything is legal and binding. All that remains is to present Grace Harper, confirm her identity, and transfer control of the estate into her hands." Ruth leaned forward, scanning the documents quickly. Her brows knit. "This is airtight," she muttered. "If it's real, there's no loophole." Michael remained silent, but his mind raced. Grace, an heiress? It explained the locket, the secrecy, the way she flinched at certain names. But more than that, it meant she wasn't just a girl struggling to survive. She was a target. Alden's gaze sharpened as he continued. "Of course, until Ms. Harper accepts her inheritance formally, the estate remains in limbo. Already, distant relatives have begun filing claims. Cousins, uncles, half-siblings. None legitimate but troublesome enough to muddy the waters. The sooner she steps forward, the cleaner this process will be." Michael leaned back in his chair, studying him. "And I'm supposed to believe you're here out of the goodness of your heart?" For the first time, Alden allowed a small, calculated smile. "I represent the Harper family's legal interests. Ensuring the rightful heir assumes control is in everyone's best interest. Including yours, Mr. Grant." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Don't lump me in with your clients. I don't want her money." Alden snapped the briefcase shut. "That may be true. But do you want her safety? Because until she steps into the light, she'll be hunted in the shadows. Money draws wolves, Mr. Grant, and she is very much alone." The words hung in the air long after Alden and his entourage departed. Michael stared at the will, its embossed seal glaring back at him like a brand. 4 years he'd navigated billion-dollar deals and ruthless competitors, but this was different. This wasn't just business. This was Grace's life. And whether she liked it or not, the truth was out now. Michael hadn't expected her to come back. Not after the note, not after the way she had vanished into the city like smoke. But 3 nights later, as he sat in his penthouse living room staring at the unopened envelope Alden had left behind, the elevator chimed. When the doors slid open, Grace stepped out. Her hood was pulled low, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes, those sharp, wary eyes, burned with something different now. Michael rose slowly. "Grace." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed the room and dropped a crumpled newspaper on the table. The headline screamed at them both. Mystery girl heiress? $100 million Harper fortune back in play. Grace's voice was tight, almost trembling. Is it true? Michael hesitated. He had promised himself he wouldn't be the one to tell her, not until she was ready. But now the whole city seemed to know. There was no shielding her from it anymore. Yes, he said finally. It's true. She turned away, pacing toward the wide glass windows that looked over the city. Her reflection glared back at her, distorted by the glass. So that's it then. I'm not just a girl anymore. I'm a headline. A walking dollar sign. Michael stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. You're still you, Grace. Nothing changes that. Her laugh was short, bitter. Everything changes that. Do you know what happens when people find out you have money? They stop seeing you. They see what they can take. My family tore itself apart over it once already. And now, her voice cracked but she forced herself steady. Now I'm back in the same nightmare. Michael's chest tightened. You don't have to face it alone. She spun on him, anger flashing through the fear in her eyes. Don't you get it? I can't trust anyone. Not you. Not your lawyers. Not the press. Everyone wants something. Even you. Me? Michael's voice hardened, though he kept it low. Grace, I have risked my reputation, my business, everything, just to keep you safe. Do you think I did that for your money? Silence stretched between them, heavy and raw. Grace looked at him, searching his face for something she wasn't sure existed. Trust maybe. Or truth. Finally, her shoulders slumped, her anger bleeding into exhaustion. Then why? Why are you doing all this for me? Michael's answer was quiet but firm. Because I see you. Not the inheritance. Not the headlines. And I know what it's like to feel hunted by the world. For the first time, Grace's eyes softened. Just slightly. Her hand brushed the locket at her throat, as though weighing whether to believe him. But before she could reply, Ruth appeared in the doorway, her face grave. Michael, there's something you both need to see. She held up her tablet, the screen glowing with a live broadcast. A new claimant had stepped forward on national television, declaring himself Grace's long-lost uncle, and demanding control of the Harper fortune. The broadcast played on every major network. A heavy-set man in his late 50s, hair slicked back, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite hide his greed. He introduced himself as Lawrence Harper, claiming to be Grace's estranged uncle. His voice dripped with practiced sorrow as he stared into the cameras. My niece, he said, pausing dramatically, has been lost to us for years. We prayed for her return. Now that she's found, I only want what's best for her, and for our family's legacy. But I fear, she's being manipulated by outsiders with their own agendas. Michael muted the screen before Grace could hear the rest, but it was too late. Her face had already gone pale. That man, she whispered, her voice trembling. He's lying. I've never even seen him before. Michael clenched his jaw. Of course he's lying. He smells money and he's going to use every trick in the book to get at it. By the next morning, the effect was already snowballing. Reporters swarmed the street outside Michael's building, shoving microphones at anyone who came or went. Tabloids ran wild with stories. Who is the real Grace Harper? $100M heiress or street scammer? Family feud explodes over Harper fortune. Inside, Grace was cornered from every side. Strangers had begun sending emails to the company, some begging for money, others threatening lawsuits. Fake cousins appeared out of nowhere with forged documents. Even old acquaintances from the streets suddenly resurfaced, claiming they had looked out for her and deserved compensation. Grace felt like she was drowning. Every time her phone buzzed, her chest tightened. She barely slept, haunted by memories of her mother's warnings. They'll never stop coming, Grace. Not until they've taken everything. One afternoon, she and Michael attempted to slip into a car with tinted windows. They didn't make it 5 feet before reporters swarmed like bees. Grace, did you abandon your family? Michael, are you using this girl to boost your public image? Grace, are you really worth $100 million? Grace froze, the barrage of questions hitting her like hailstones. Cameras flashed. Microphones pushed forward. Someone grabbed at her sleeve. Panic surged in her chest. Michael reacted instantly. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders and steered her firmly toward the car. His voice cut through the chaos, deep and commanding. Step back. You're frightening her. The driver revved the engine, forcing space, and Michael shoved Grace inside before sliding in after her. The doors locked, muffling the noise outside, but Grace's hands were shaking as she pulled her hood over her face. I can't do this, she whispered. I'm not strong enough for this. Michael turned toward her, his tone steady. Grace, listen to me. These people don't care about you, they care about the money. But that doesn't define you. You are stronger than you think. And you're not alone in this fight. For a moment, her eyes lifted to meet his. Behind the fear there was a flicker of something else, determination. But it was fragile, hanging by a thread. Outside, the mob of cameras continued to flash, hungry for their story. And inside, Grace realized for the first time, if she didn't take control soon, someone else would. The chaos of the media storm didn't stop at Michael's building, it followed Grace everywhere. Even inside the fortified glass and steel walls of Grant Enterprises, whispers chased her down the halls. Employees stole glances, some pitying, others calculating, as if they were trying to decide whether to sympathize with her or angle for a piece of the Harper fortune. One afternoon, Ruth pulled Michael aside. We need to tighten the circle, she said in a low voice. Someone inside has been leaking information. The tabloids reported details no one but us should know. Michael's jaw hardened. You think it's one of ours? Ruth gave him a pointed look. I think money makes people do stupid things. Later that day, Grace sat in Michael's office, hugging her knees to her chest on the wide leather chair. She looked small, like a child trapped in an oversized world. Michael set a mug of hot chocolate in front of her, and for the first time in days, her shoulders softened slightly. That's when the knock came. The door opened and a woman stepped inside, tall, sharp-featured, wearing a tailored navy blazer. Grace's eyes widened, recognition flickering across her face. Aunt Lydia, she whispered. Michael stiffened. You know her? Grace nodded slowly, her voice shaky. She was my mother's sister, but we lost contact after everything. Lydia's gaze softened as she crossed the room. Grace, I've been searching for you ever since your mother passed. You've grown so much. She reached for Grace's hand, but Grace hesitated before letting her touch it. Michael's instinct screamed caution, but Lydia's presence was disarming. Unlike Alden or the so-called uncle on TV, she seemed genuinely emotional. She even had an old photo of herself with Grace's mother to prove their connection. I don't want your money, Lydia said firmly. I just want to protect you. Your grandfather's estate, it will draw out the worst people. Already has, it seems. Her eyes flicked toward Michael, subtle but sharp. Grace caught it too and her stomach knotted. Was Lydia warning her, or planting seeds of doubt? That night, while Michael held a late meeting with his board, Grace sat with Ruth in the penthouse kitchen. Ruth spoke plainly, her voice as steady as always. Listen, Grace. You can't just trust people because they share your blood. I've seen sharks in suits take down whole companies and they smiled while doing it. Family doesn't always mean loyalty. Grace nodded, staring into her mug. Then who can I trust? Ruth gave her a long look. The ones who show up when you've got nothing to give. The words sank deep, stirring memories of Michael crouching on the sidewalk, offering her a sandwich without asking for anything in return. But later that night, as Grace walked past Michael's study, she overheard fragments of his phone call, words like leverage, protection, and controlling the narrative. Her chest tightened. Was Ruth wrong? Or was Michael just another player in a game she never wanted to be part of? For the first time, Grace wasn't sure if her greatest ally might also be her biggest betrayal. Grace hadn't slept properly in weeks. Every night, the headlines replayed in her head like a drumbeat. $100 million heiress. Mystery beggar girl. Family fortune in turmoil. No matter where she turned, there was noise. Reporters shouting questions, strangers tugging at her for attention, Michael and Ruth whispering strategies in corners. Even Aunt Lydia's sudden reappearance gnawed at her. Each smile, each gesture of concern felt like it carried an invisible price tag. By the third week, her nerves were raw. It happened one evening after another barrage of reporters forced their way near the lobby. Michael had shielded her into the elevator, but Grace was trembling by the time they reached the penthouse. She stormed into the guest room, slamming the door behind her. Michael followed quietly. Grace. Don't. Her voice cracked like glass. She stood in front of the mirror, yanking the locket from her neck and hurling it onto the dresser. I can't breathe anymore. Everywhere I look, it's about the money. That's all anyone sees when they look at me. Michael tried to keep his voice calm. That's not what I see. She turned on him, her eyes wild, her fists clenched at her sides. Then what do you see, Michael? Because right now, I don't even know who you are. You talk on the phone about leverage, controlling narratives. How is that any different from Alden or Lydia or that fake uncle on TV? You're all trying to control me. Michael froze, stung by her words. He took a careful step forward. I've made mistakes, Grace. I admit that. But I've never once wanted your money. I only wanted you safe. Tears welled in her eyes. She sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. Safe? Do you know what safe feels like? Because I don't. Not since my mom died. Not since I was shoved into streets that swallowed me whole. And now everyone's pulling at me again. I don't belong anywhere, not in the Harper mansion, not here in your world of glass towers. Nowhere. Michael knelt in front of her, but he didn't reach out. He simply waited, his voice low. Then tell me where you do belong. Tell me what you want, not what they want, not what I want. Just you. Grace lifted her tear-streaked face, but the question stunned her into silence. For so long she had only been surviving, one step to the next, one day to the next. Wanting anything beyond food, warmth, or safety had felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Now she had to decide, would she keep running from her past, or face it and claim her place in it? Her hands trembled as she whispered, I don't know who to trust anymore. Michael's answer was steady, unwavering. Then start by trusting yourself. The words lingered in the quiet room. For the first time in years, Grace realized the next move wasn't about inheritance or survival. It was about choosing who she was going to be. The following morning, Grace sat in the penthouse kitchen, staring at the skyline as sunlight cut through the glass walls. She hadn't slept much, but her mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. Michael entered quietly, expecting to see her curled into herself again. Instead, he found her upright, locket back around her neck, a steady fire in her eyes. I'm done hiding, she said simply. Michael blinked. Grace. No, she interrupted, her voice firm. All this time people have been deciding who I am. A beggar. An heiress. A pawn. I'm not letting them write my story anymore. She stood, shoulders squared. It's mine. Michael studied her, the steel in her tone. For the first time he saw not just the fragile girl from the street, but the woman her mother must have hoped she'd become. Then what's your plan? He asked carefully. Grace exhaled, steadying herself. We fight back with the truth. If I let Alden or Lydia or that fake uncle control the story, I'll never escape them. But if I step forward on my own terms, they can't twist me into something I'm not. Michael frowned. Going public is dangerous. Once you put yourself out there, you can't take it back. I know, Grace said, lifting her chin. But I've been running all my life. Maybe it's time I stopped. That afternoon, Ruth arranged a meeting with a trusted journalist, one of the few reporters who had built a reputation for integrity. They met in a small, unmarked office away from the chaos of downtown. The journalist, a woman named Clara, listened intently as Grace told her story for the first time. Not the headlines, not the speculation, but the truth. She spoke about her childhood, about her mother's warnings, about the night she lost everything. She admitted the years of homelessness, the hunger, the fear. Her voice broke when she described the loneliness, but she didn't flinch. For the first time she claimed her pain out loud. Clara set her pen down. Grace, this is more than an inheritance story. It's survival. It's resilience. If you're willing to go on record, I promise, I'll tell it right. Grace nodded, a quiet resolve in her chest. Then let's do it. Later that evening, back at the penthouse, Michael watched her from across the room as she drafted a short statement with Ruth's help. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't legal jargon. It was her voice. My name is Grace Harper. For years I lived unseen, unheard, and unwanted. Now I've learned the truth of who I am, but I will not be defined by wealth or bloodlines. I will tell my own story in my own words. When she finished reading it aloud, Michael felt something shift in the room. The girl who once shrank under the weight of the world now stood taller, steadier, her voice cutting through the silence like glass. Grace Harper wasn't hiding anymore. She was about to step into the storm on her own terms. The ballroom of the downtown hotel had been transformed into a press arena. Rows of chairs were crammed with journalists, cameras mounted on tripods, microphones pointed at the podium like weapons. The air buzzed with anticipation. Everyone wanted the first soundbite from the girl who had gone from beggar to billionaire overnight. Michael stood at the side of the stage, arms crossed, scanning the crowd. Security lined the walls, but even so, the atmosphere felt volatile. He glanced at Grace. She stood behind the curtain, dressed simply in a navy blouse and black slacks, her locket resting against her collarbone. No makeup artist, no stylist, just herself. You don't have to do this, Michael murmured. Grace met his eyes. Yes, I do. Ruth squeezed her shoulder. Then do it your way. The announcer's voice boomed, Ladies and gentlemen, Grace Harper. A flurry of flashes erupted as she stepped to the podium. For a moment, the noise and brightness threatened to swallow her whole. But then she gripped the sides of the lectern, lifted her chin and let the room settle. "My name is Grace Harper," she began, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "You've read stories about me. Some say I'm a fraud. Others say I'm a helpless girl lost in a fortune I don't understand. Tonight, I want you to hear the truth, from me, not from them." The room quieted. Even the cameras seemed to still. "I was not raised with wealth. I lost my mother when I was very young and for years I lived on the streets. I begged to eat. I slept where I could. I learned to survive in ways no child should have to. And through it all no one knew my name." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Now you know it, Grace Harper. Yes, I am heir to the Harper estate. But that money does not define me. My survival does. My choices do. I do." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hands shot up, reporters shouting questions. One voice cut through, "What about Lawrence Harper? He claims to be your uncle." Grace's eyes hardened. "Lawrence Harper is not my family. Family is not blood, it is loyalty. The people who stood by me when I had nothing, those are the ones I trust. Anyone else is here for one reason, greed." Another reporter barked, "And Michael Grant? Is he using you for publicity?" The crowd erupted in flashes again, cameras snapping Michael's face as he stiffened at the question. All eyes turned back to Grace. She looked at Michael for a long moment, then back at the reporters. "Michael Grant gave me food when I was hungry, shelter when I had nowhere to go. He didn't know my name, didn't know my past, didn't ask for anything in return. That's more than I can say for anyone claiming to be my blood." The room went still. For the first time, Grace wasn't a pawn in someone else's narrative. She was the one writing it. And the world was listening. The courthouse loomed like a stone giant, its marble steps crowded with reporters shouting questions as Grace, Michael and Ruth climbed toward the entrance. Cameras flashed, their shouts echoing through the cold morning air. "Grace, do you trust the will is authentic? Are you prepared to face your uncle in court? Do you even know how to manage $100 million? Grace didn't answer. Her jaw was tight, her fingers gripping the strap of her simple bag. Michael walked beside her, shielding her from the press with his frame, while Ruth led them swiftly inside. The courtroom itself was heavy with silence, every seat filled. On one side sat Grace with Ruth and Michael. On the other, Lawrence Harper, the self-proclaimed uncle, with a slick attorney and two of Lydia's assistants whispering furiously in his ear. The air reeked of entitlement. The judge entered, stern and unreadable. "Court is now in session." Ruth rose first. Her tone was calm but firm as she presented the original will Grace had inherited, authenticated by two independent experts. She spoke of the Harper family's history, the estate, the philanthropic legacy that Grace's late grandfather had intended to continue. But Lawrence's lawyer was ruthless. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket and leaned into the theatrics. "Your Honor, my client is the true heir. This girl, while pitiable, is an imposter. She was found on the streets, with no proof of identity until recently. How convenient that she appears now, when the estate's value has risen to over $100 million. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Grace clenched her fists, but Ruth touched her hand gently, signaling patience. The lawyer continued, circling like a shark. "We also have evidence that she has been manipulated by Mr. Michael Grant, whose sudden role in her life coincides suspiciously with her newfound wealth. Might this all be an elaborate scheme to control her fortune?" Michael stiffened, anger burning in his eyes. Grace wanted to leap to his defense, but Ruth rose instead. "Your Honor," Ruth said, her voice cutting through the noise, "what you are hearing is not a case built on truth but on fear. Fear that this young woman, who has endured suffering beyond imagination, has finally been given her rightful place. The will is clear. The experts have verified it. Grace Harper is the heir. Period." The judge nodded, expression unreadable, then turned to Grace. "Miss Harper, will you stand?" The room hushed as Grace rose to her feet. Her knees trembled, but her voice did not. "Your Honor, I am not here to fight for money. I never asked for this fortune. But I will not let liars and manipulators take away what my grandfather intended for me, and what my mother wanted me to know. I am Grace Harper. And I will not be erased." For a moment, the silence was so complete you could hear the scratching of pens. Even Lawrence shifted uncomfortably, his confidence faltering under her steady gaze. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Very well. I have heard enough. This case is not as simple as it seems, but one thing is clear, Grace Harper will not be silenced. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the chamber, leaving everyone breathless. The gavel's echo still hung in the air when Lawrence's lawyer smirked, clearly not finished. He tapped a folder on the desk, his voice dripping with false confidence. Your Honor, before you conclude, we have new evidence. Documents recently uncovered show that the Harper will in Grace's possession may be forged. My client has an earlier draft, signed, sealed, and witnessed, that names him as the rightful heir. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted, cameras clicked, and whispers spread like wildfire. Grace's stomach lurched as the lawyer handed the judge a neatly bound stack of papers. Ruth shot to her feet. Objection. These so-called documents have not been authenticated. Introducing them at the 11th hour is a deliberate stunt. The judge raised a hand. Order. This evidence will be reviewed. Grace gripped the edge of the table, her nails digging into the wood. Her voice shook as she whispered to Ruth, "What if it's true? What if everything I thought I knew is a lie?" Ruth leaned close, eyes steady. Grace, forged documents are their specialty. This isn't about truth, it's about intimidation. Don't let them break you. As the clerk handed the papers to the judge, Michael noticed something odd. He leaned forward, squinting. Ruth, look at the signature date. Ruth's eyes flicked across the page. Then they widened. She stood sharply. Your Honor, may I address the court? The judge gestured for her to proceed. Ruth held up the so-called will. This document is dated 2 months after Mr. Harper's verified death certificate. Which means one of two things. Either Lawrence Harper has discovered necromancy, or this is the most blatant forgery I've ever seen in my 30 years of practice. Gasps and muffled laughter rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Is this true? The clerk quickly compared the dates, then nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. The signature date is later than Mr. Harper's death. The judge's gavel slammed down. Mr. Lawrence Harper, you will explain this immediately. Lawrence sputtered, his lawyer fumbling for words. It must be an administrative error. But before he could finish, Ruth cut in. An administrative error doesn't explain why the witness signatures belong to individuals who don't exist. We ran a preliminary check. These names are fabricated. The courtroom exploded with noise. Reporters nearly fell over each other trying to capture the chaos. Lawrence's face turned ashen, sweat beading at his temple. Grace stood slowly, her voice clear and unwavering. This is what I've been fighting against. Not just greed but lies stacked on lies. I may have grown up on the streets, but I know the truth when I see it. And the truth is, this family tried to erase me. But I'm still here. The gallery erupted in applause before the judge barked, "Order!" He slammed his gavel once more. This court will investigate the authenticity of these documents thoroughly. But as of now, the credibility of the claimant, Mr. Lawrence Harper, is in serious doubt. Grace exhaled shakily, her fingers unclenching. For the first time, the tide had turned in her favor, not just legally but publicly. And Lawrence Harper knew it. The courthouse corridors buzzed like a hive after the shocking twist. Journalists crowded the steps outside, shouting questions into microphones. But inside, the conspirators were beginning to unravel. Lawrence stormed into a side room, slamming the door behind him. His lawyer followed, sweating bullets. Lydia was already there, pacing like a caged animal. "You idiot," she snapped at Lawrence. "How could you not check the dates?" Lawrence jabbed a finger at her. "Don't you dare put this on me. You and your pet lawyer were supposed to handle the paperwork." The lawyer's voice cracked. "The documents were rushed. He said we needed something concrete, fast." "I didn't think the judge would notice." "You didn't think?" Lydia seethed. "Now the entire press is feasting on this. Grace looks like the victim and we look like criminals." Meanwhile, in another wing of the courthouse, Grace sat with Ruth and Michael, a quiet steadiness settling over her. For the first time she wasn't just reacting, she was choosing. "They'll keep coming," Michael warned. "Even if Lawrence collapses, there will always be someone else who wants a piece." Grace nodded. "Then let them come. I won't run again. If they try to fight in the dark, I'll bring everything into the light." That afternoon, the headlines spread like wildfire. Fake will exposed in Harper inheritance battle. Beggar heiress speaks out, "I will not be erased." Uncle's claim crumbles under court scrutiny. Public opinion swung sharply in Grace's favor. Social media filled with her quotes, her resilience making her a symbol of strength. For the first time she wasn't seen as a pawn, but as a person. Back in the conspirators' hideout, the collapse accelerated. Sponsors pulled away. The lawyer's firm issued a statement disowning him. Lydia's company stock plummeted after her name was linked to the scandal. Lawrence's accounts were flagged for investigation. "Everything's falling apart," Lydia whispered, sinking into a chair. Lawrence's face hardened, desperation burning in his eyes. "Then we take her down by any means necessary." But Lydia shook her head. "It's over, Lawrence. She won the court of public opinion. That's harder to fight than any judge." For once, Lydia looked almost human, exhausted, beaten. She grabbed her bag and walked out, leaving Lawrence alone with his fury. As the courtroom emptied that evening, Grace paused at the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed, but she didn't flinch. She raised her voice just enough for them to hear. "I didn't choose this battle, but I will finish it. For every child who was ignored. For every voice that was silenced. I'm not just fighting for money, I'm fighting for truth." The cameras flashed wildly. Behind her, Michael smiled faintly. Ruth placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. For the first time, Grace Harper wasn't just surviving. She was leading. The days after the courtroom twist were a whirlwind. Grace's story trended across every platform. Yet even as the conspirators collapsed, a new twist emerged. One evening, Ruth entered the penthouse with a sealed envelope in her hand. "Grace, this came through a private courier. No sender listed." Grace hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper and an old photograph. Her breath caught. The photo showed her mother, smiling, standing beside a man Grace had never seen before. Written on the back, "To my dearest friend Eleanor, with gratitude, Daniel." The letter beneath read, "Grace, if you're reading this, then you've discovered the inheritance. I was your grandfather's attorney once. There are things about the estate you don't know, things he wanted preserved for you. Meet me tomorrow at St. Matthew's Church, 10 a.m. I can help you finish this." Grace looked up at Ruth, her pulse racing. "Do you think it's real?" Ruth frowned. "Daniel was a respected name years ago, but he vanished after your grandfather's death. If this is him, he may know truths no one else has." Michael crossed his arms. "Or it could be another trap." Grace shook her head, holding the photograph tightly. "No. This feels different." The next morning they arrived at the small stone church on the edge of the city. Inside, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows. At the front pew sat an elderly man with silver hair and kind eyes. "You came," he said softly, rising with effort. "Grace Harper." Her chest tightened. "You knew my mother." He nodded. "She was the bravest woman I ever met. She feared this day would come, so she left instructions, secrets about your inheritance and why so many people are desperate to steal it." Michael leaned in, wary. "And why tell her now?" Daniel's gaze was steady. "Because she's ready. The estate isn't just money, it holds power, influence. And if Grace doesn't take control of it, others will." Grace clutched her locket, her voice steady. "Then show me." The old man smiled faintly. "I thought you'd say that." Deep in the church's basement, Daniel unlocked a dusty safe hidden behind the altar. Inside were ledgers, letters, and a sealed envelope marked with her grandfather's handwriting. Grace's hands shook as she opened it. "To my granddaughter Grace. If you are reading this, it means the world has tried to bury you as it buried me. This inheritance is not meant for greed. It is meant for rebuilding, for lifting those who were forgotten as I once was. You will be tempted by wolves, but remember, true power lies not in holding wealth but in giving it." Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the letter. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "He wanted you to continue his mission. That's why Lawrence, Lydia, and the rest fought so hard. They didn't just want money, they wanted control of a legacy meant to help thousands." Grace inhaled sharply. For the first time she understood, this wasn't just about her survival. It was about responsibility. She looked at Michael, then at Ruth. "Then I know what I have to do." Weeks later, Grace stood on a stage, not in a courtroom but at the opening of the Harper Foundation headquarters. Behind her, banners read, "Restoring Hope. Restoring Dignity." The room was filled with reporters, community leaders, and children from the shelters she had once slept in. Cameras flashed, but this time Grace wasn't nervous. She was proud. "My name is Grace Harper," she said, her voice strong. "I was once a girl the world ignored. Today I stand not for myself but for those still unheard. This foundation is not about wealth, it is about hope. Together we will rebuild lives." Applause thundered through the hall. At the edge of the crowd, Michael smiled, his eyes never leaving her. Ruth clapped with quiet pride. Even Daniel, frail but standing, nodded with approval. Grace looked out at the faces before her. For so long she had felt invisible. But now she was not only seen, she was a light for others. And in that moment she knew her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning.